But it's a large marketplace. To your point, you're serving a different marketplace than Steven Stagmeister is serving. He can still decide what he chooses to work for. And then people on CrowdSPRING get to decide what they choose to work for. If they want to work for free, it seems fair to me.
I think what, there's a lesson also to be learned from games like Spore, where, Will Wright said he could never have designed that game. There's no way that the number of hours it would have taken for him to design enough beings in that game for it to be interesting was prohibitive. So the fact that he created, as a designer, he created design tools to harness the power of the crowd and put that in as content, that to me is one of the most exciting things about this, that it's not about whining that, oh my God, I used to be able to charge 20,000 and now I charge 500 because people in Serbia are competing with me, or, oh, I have to do spec work. We're doing spec work, we're not getting paid for this. That's, people do spec work every day. Right? Are you? No, but I think as designers, the question is, one of the things that can be really fascinating is, how can you tap into the power of the crowd to build things? Some of my, one of my favorite pieces of art is this thing called the sheep market, right? Where Aaron Copland asked, I think it was 1,000 people, 10,000 people to draw a picture of a sheep. That's it.
On Amazon, I can't.
Right, paid him each a penny, 2 pennies, something like that. He did another project recently called 10,000 cents, where he took a $100 bill and he cut it up into 10,000 pieces, and he used Amazon and he asked people to draw this one little 1/10,000th of the dollar using his proprietary drawing technology. Then he recorded all of them, put them all back together, and reassembled this piece of art. And it's a beautiful piece of art, and it's a great sort of social commentary, and it's fascinating, it's interesting, and I think that there's two things going on, right? I think one is the designers need to move along with the rest of the world to understand that the craft has turned into an art and has turned into something that is much more about problem solving. It's really about design thinking, not about the design mechanics. Although craft is important, it's necessary, it's just not sufficient. But the other thing is to turn it around and say, okay, as a designer, how can you utilize the crowd to solve problems that you couldn't solve as an individual? And I think that's, we're going to turn this into something exciting, not something that scares.
Well, and I think the profession realizes that. I mean, I think that there are people who are frightened by the fact that the marketplace is driving prices down. There's also, I think the profession understands that the real value is this approach to problem solving, how do you design, the design thinking of it, that in fact it's moving from dealing with making two-dimensional objects to conceiving multi-dimensional strategies. I mean, that, it's moving up this axis. And if you look at least the more primitive marketplaces, it's often about form. And I think that, when you talk about branding in the 80s, 90s, when design started dealing with form and content, it became communication design instead of graphic design. But now it's all form, content, and context over time. How do we communicate? And then maybe it's a brand experience too, but it's basically an experience that you're designing, and that needs interaction. And the entire profession needs to move up that chain toward that way of thinking, or they are going to get trapped in an area where the digital marketplace is trouble.
But I think what's important to this audience too is us up here, we can tell very quickly who's amateur and who's professional on these sites. So it really depends on why clients are going to the site. If they're going there to engage a fan base, that's one thing. But I think that the cream still rises to the top. That's my opinion.
The question that raises is, for an existing agency, a typical agency, let's say, rather than to aviation, do you shrink and turn yourself into a crowd-sourced business, a Vixen Sports model, or do you just use crowds? Like, do you partner with you guys, or do you use a CrowdSPRING or a Gildix or whatever? And I think that's an interesting challenge. I don't know what you think how you're dealing with that, but it's almost impossible to build in the skills you need, particularly in digital areas and mobile areas, to stay effective.
No, that's absolutely right. I mean, we're pretty massive in 2,000 people and probably about 600 creatives around the world. So we're pretty conventional in the sense that there's a lot of permanent employed staff doing stuff. But increasingly, we're using more and more. Digital agencies always used to feel that they should make everything, and we've grown up a bit now, and we realise that we can't. And so we use a sort of diaspora of talent as well. And I think that the classic creative department probably, its days are numbered, and it's quite difficult to manage them. And people, there's so much opportunity for people to sort of have their skills around. So I think you probably will find some strategic leadership and senior sort of creative talent being permanent members of staff, and a much more of a outsourced model.
So certainly in terms of the future of the creative process, collaboration and the fact that the internet has made it much easier to have this collaboration, no question. I think that since Craig brought one element in out of the dark, which is spec work, let me just raise that, because I imagine that certainly some of the faculty members here and maybe many of the students would think that I would take a really doctrinaire approach, or spec work is wrong. The idea of speculative work where you're doing creative work without compensation is absolutely wrong. Well, it's a little more nuanced than that, partially because AIGA and the profession has got to recognize through a crowdsourcing process of its own, listen to what's happening in the dynamics of the 21st century. And there's no question that individuals are making decisions. I mean, the decisions are not being made by autocratic figures anymore, whether it's the intuitive genius who's the designer, or whether it's an organization. AIGA, 100 years old, what are we? We are hopefully an imprimatur of excellence, both in terms of profession and in terms of craft, and we're a central place, and we're a membership organization. Well, in fact, if you look at anybody who has been born since 1980, most of them, because of the open source dynamic, are looking for the sharing of ideas through co-creation or through crowdsourcing, and are non-joiners. They want it for nothing. And so here we are, and they're suspicious of authority, because in fact they want to participate in establishing authority. Well, if that's what's happening in terms of an entire generation, then our role is to figure out how do we help all of you create a sense of principles that results in respect for the work that you do, proper evaluation of what you do, and an opportunity to do the best possible work you can do. I mean, it's not actually about technique in terms of what we're trying to do or place. It's about relevance first, leadership, and opportunity. It's about what can we do to make it clear that your creative work is being respected and valued. So on spec work, there are a couple of issues. Certainly we have realized that there were a categorical statement against spec work, creative work without compensation, which is not something that made sense in the 21st century. I mean, there are areas where, whether it's an internship, whether it's pro bono work because you believe in doing something that will improve the quality of life, those are opportunities which you should be able to undertake without compensation. The issue is when someone else is financially benefiting from your work without you being compensated. And that's the point at which it becomes problematic. So that it's true that you'll be challenged by opportunities to use crowdsourcing to be discovered. I mean, the idea that the Serbian designer will come to life. I mean, there is no question that it's an opportunity for you. It becomes really problematic when the ownership of your creative property, by virtue of your trying to be seen, becomes someone else's and is unfairly compensated. So certainly the spec work against competition, spec work provision against competitions is pretty strong in the sense of how do you get respected for the contribution that you give. And I'm not suggesting anyone here is talking about those kinds of competitions.